The day my sister called me from the hospital, I was sitting in my recliner watching the evening news, half asleep, the way a 63-year-old man does after a long day. I almost didn't pick up. I wish I could say I had some kind of feeling, some instinct that told me something was wrong. I didn't. I just saw her name on the screen and answered. She could barely get the words out. "He put her in the hospital," she said. "He actually put her in the hospital." I sat up so fast the footrest snapped shut. Who? What happened? Which hospital? Mercy General. It's her wrist. He says she fell. She's not saying anything different, but I know what I saw when I got there. The way she looked at me, she wasn't going to say a word. I was already standing, already looking for my keys. My daughter was 31 years old. She had a little boy, 7 years old, smart as a whip, gap-toothed smile, called me Pop Pop like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she had a husband named Sterling. Sterling Pruitt. I want you to hold on to that name because I want you to understand exactly who I'm talking about when I tell you what happened. I got to Mercy General in 40 minutes. My sister was already there, standing in the hallway outside the room with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. That's how I knew it was serious. My sister doesn't stand like that unless she's holding something back that she doesn't trust herself to say out loud. I walked into that room and my daughter was sitting up in the bed, her left wrist in a temporary splint, an IV in her right arm. She looked at me and her eyes went soft and scared at the same time, the way they used to when she was small and had done something she thought would disappoint me. "Daddy," she said, "I'm fine. I tripped on the stairs." I pulled a chair up next to her bed and I sat down and I took her hand, the one without the splint, and I held it the way I used to hold it when she was 4 years old and we were crossing the street. "Baby," I said quietly, "you don't have to say anything right now. But I need you to know that whatever the truth is, I'm on your side, not his, yours." She looked at the window. She didn't say anything, but her fingers tightened around mine and that told me everything. Sterling wasn't at the hospital. That alone told me something. If my wife had fallen on the stairs and broken her wrist, you would have had to drag me out of that hospital. I would have been there before the ambulance arrived. The fact that he wasn't there, that he'd let her sister be the one to make the calls, that he was somewhere else doing something else while his wife sat in a hospital bed, that told me the kind of man I was dealing with. I'd not always known. That's a thing that stays with me even now. I didn't know in the beginning. When my daughter first brought Sterling home, he was charming. He had this way of looking you in the eye when he talked, like you were the only person in the room. He had a firm handshake and he opened doors and he laughed at my jokes. He called me sir. My wife, God rest her, had liked him. She'd said, "He's a good one." She passed 3 years into their marriage before I understood what was actually happening inside that house. I think about that sometimes. I think about whether she would have seen it sooner than I did. The signs were there. I see that clearly now. The way my daughter started canceling plans. First it was little things, a birthday dinner, a Sunday cookout, then holidays started getting complicated. Sterling had his family. Sterling had his family. Sterling had plans. Sterling needed this. Sterling wanted that. My grandson's school play, I found out about it 2 days afterward because it was just a short notice thing and they didn't want to bother me. That's how it works. Slowly, like someone turning down a dimmer switch, you don't notice the room getting darker until one day you realize you can barely see. The rest was not the first time he put his hands on her. I know that now. At the time, sitting in that hospital room, I suspected it, but I didn't have the full picture. My daughter gave me pieces over the following days, not all at once, not in a straight line. She'd say something and then pull back. Take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's what my sister meant about the codependency. My daughter loved him in that broken, desperate way that abuse creates. Not the healthy love of a whole person, but the complicated, knotted-up love of someone who has been made to feel like they need the very person who hurts them. I had to be careful. I knew that. If I pushed too hard, she'd close up entirely. If I came in with sirens blazing, Sterling would find a way to use it against her, make her feel like her family was the problem, not him. I had seen it happen with other families, so I didn't push. I showed up. I called. I brought food. I played with my grandson on the weekends when Sterling was supposedly at work, which turned out to be more complicated than I knew. 2 months after the hospital visit, my daughter called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. I pulled over to the side of the road and I listened. Somewhere between the crying and the trying to catch her breath, the story came out. Sterling had not just been hurting her physically. He had been systematically draining their finances. My daughter worked as a dental hygienist, good steady income, and for years she had been handing over her paychecks to a joint account that Sterling controlled. He had talked her out of her own name being on the mortgage. He managed the credit cards. She had a debit card that he monitored. She had no savings of her own. When she tried to set a little aside, he found it and called her a thief. Called her a thief in her own house, for her own money. Today she called me crying she had found out he had a second cell phone. I won't get into the details of what was on that phone because my grandson might one day be old enough to find this story, and I won't do that to him. But I will say that what my daughter found was only part of what was happening. The betrayal had layers. I drove to her house, not to confront Sterling, he wasn't there. I drove there because my daughter was alone with my 7-year-old grandson and she needed her father. I sat at that kitchen table and she told me everything. Not just the second phone. Everything, 2 years of it, things she had been carrying alone. By the time she finished talking, it was past midnight. My grandson had fallen asleep on the couch covered with a throw blanket, one sock on and one sock off the way kids sleep when they don't mean to. My daughter looked exhausted in a way that wasn't just about that day. It was accumulated exhaustion, years of it. I told her, "You don't have to stay." She said, "I know, but it's not that simple." I said, "I know it isn't, but I want you to know the door is open. My house is your house, yours and his." I looked over at my grandson. "Whenever you're ready." She wasn't ready yet. That was hard to accept, but I accepted it because I had to. What I did not accept was doing nothing. I talked to my son-in-law's mother exactly once, early on, trying to see if she understood what her son was doing. She was a pleasant-seeming woman, soft-spoken, invited me in and offered me sweet tea. But within 5 minutes it became clear that in her mind, my daughter was the problem. Too sensitive, too dependent, didn't know how to manage a household, wasn't raised right. She said that last part with a particular kind of smile that was meant to land like a punch, and did. I finished my sweet tea and I left and I never tried that route again. His brother was worse. His brother, Terrence, was the kind of man who thought the fact that Sterling had a job and a house meant he was a good husband by definition. He told me to my face, at a family gathering my daughter had insisted I attend in a moment of her trying to keep the peace, that I needed to let them handle their marriage. He said it with that slow, confident voice that men use when they've never once been told they were wrong about anything. I smiled and nodded, and I stored that away. Here's what I want you to understand about what happened next. I am not a violent man. I have never been a violent man. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher. I coached junior varsity basketball for 12 of those years. I have refereed more arguments between teenagers than I can count, and I have always believed that the way through a problem is patience and strategy, not temper. I say that so you understand that what I did deliberately. Not out of anger, though I had plenty of it, out of strategy. My daughter eventually did leave. It took 4 more months after that midnight conversation, and it took Sterling making a mistake that even she couldn't explain away. He shoved her in front of my grandson. The boy saw it. 7 years old, and he saw his father shove his mother into the doorframe of the bathroom. She called me from the neighbor's house, and this time there was something different in her voice. The softness towards Sterling was gone. In its place was something harder and clearer, like she had finally seen something she couldn't unsee. I drove there in 20 minutes. I got her and my grandson into my car with 2 bags of clothes, and I drove them to my house. And I want to tell you that I didn't look back because I was driving forward, but also because if I had gone back inside that house in that moment, I don't know what I would have done. And I am a man who needs to know what he will do before he does it. So they were with me, safe, good. But Sterling did not behave the way a man should when his wife leaves. He did not reflect. He did not seek help. He called her phone 40 times the first night. He showed up at my house at 11 in the evening, rang the bell, stood on my porch looking the way men like that look when they've lost control of a situation. Not sad, not remorseful, just angry that the thing he owned had gotten away. I opened the door and I told him calmly that my daughter was not going to come to the door. that they would communicate through attorneys from this point forward, and that he needed to leave my property. He called me an old man. He said some other things. He said I had always been a problem, that I'd turned his wife against him, that I was the reason their marriage was failing. He was working himself up, getting louder, pointing his finger at me on my own porch. I said, "Son, I'm going to ask you one more time to step off my property." He got closer instead. Now, I need to tell you something about myself. Something Sterling did not know because he had never bothered to learn anything about the man his wife called Daddy. I grew up in Baltimore. I grew up in a neighborhood where you learn to handle yourself or you learn to be a target. And I learned to handle myself. For most of my adult life, that history had been irrelevant because I had built a different kind of life. But it does not leave you. It is like riding a bicycle. Your body remembers. More practically, for the last 4 years, I've been going to a boxing gym 3 mornings a week, not because I was looking for a fight, because I have high blood pressure and my doctor told me I needed cardio and I hate running. I'm 63 years old, I am 6 feet 1 inch tall, and I have been hitting a heavy bag 3 times a week for 4 years. Sterling Pruitt knew none of this. Sterling saw a retired teacher in reading glasses who was soft-spoken and polite. He grabbed the front of my shirt. I'm not going to dramatize what happened because it didn't feel dramatic in the moment. It felt like something shifting into a gear it had been waiting to find. I broke his grip, I got inside his reach, and I made sure he understood, very clearly and very physically, that he had made a significant error in judgment. It was not long, it was not complicated, it was enough. He left my property. He called the police. Of course he did. 2 officers came to my house, and I spoke with them calmly. And my daughter spoke with them, and there was a conversation about the history of what had been happening, the hospital visit, the documented calls, the neighbor who had witnessed the shove. The officers were professional. Sterling, for his part, looked exactly the way a man looks when he is called the police, expecting them to side with him, and slowly realized they were not going to. No charges were filed against me that night. What happened over the following months was slower and more complicated, the way real justice usually is. My daughter filed for divorce. She got an attorney, a good one, a woman who had seen situations like this many times and knew exactly what needed to be documented. The financial control, the isolation, the physical incidents, Sterling's pattern of behavior, it all came out. The divorce took 11 months. It was not easy. There were days my daughter wavered. There were days I sat with her at my kitchen table while she cried and questioned herself, and I just stayed present because that was what she needed. The courts did not look kindly on Sterling. The financial coercion in particular, the way he had removed her name from the mortgage, controlled her income, prevented her from having independent savings. That was documented thoroughly. My daughter got the house. She got primary custody of my grandson. Sterling got supervised visitation, at least initially given what my grandson had witnessed. Terrence called me once during all of this. He had a different tone than the last time we'd spoken. He wanted to talk, he said. I told him there was nothing to talk about. I wished him well and I hung up. Sterling's mother I have not spoken to since the sweet tea. What I think about most, when I think about that time, is my grandson. He's 9 now. He is still gap-toothed, still calls me Pop-Pop. He started playing Little League this spring, third base, not very good yet, but trying hard, which is more important anyway. He doesn't talk much about what happened. Kids process things in their own time and in their own way, and you don't push. But one afternoon, a few months after the divorce was finalized, he was sitting with me on the back porch, and he looked up at me and said, out of nowhere, "Popov, are you strong?" I looked at him for a moment. I said, "Strong enough." He thought about that. Then he nodded, like it was exactly the right answer, and went back to throwing a tennis ball against the fence post. My daughter is doing well. She has her own bank account, her own name on a lease for a townhouse 3 miles from me, her own sense of herself that is slowly coming back the way feeling comes back after numbness. Sometimes painfully, in pins and needles, but coming back nonetheless. She started taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings, which has nothing to do with anything except that she just wanted to try something for no reason other than wanting to. That felt important to me. That felt like her. I have had people ask me, since all of this came out, whether I regret how I handled the night Sterling came to my porch, whether I worry about what could have happened. whether I think there was a better way. Here's what I tell him. I am a man who spent 3 decades teaching young people about history, about the patterns that repeat themselves, about what happens when good people stand back and wait for someone else to act. I know there are systems in place. I know those systems matter. I use them. My daughter used them, the attorney used them, the court used them. But there was also a moment on my porch, at 11 o'clock at night, when a man who had been hurting my daughter for years put his hands on me and expected me to fold. He was wrong about who I was. I don't celebrate what happened, but I don't regret it either. I protected my home. I protected my daughter. I protected my grandson sleeping upstairs who had already seen too much. Some men need to learn through patience and conversation and the slow turning of institutional wheels. And some men need to learn the way Sterling learned, standing on a porch in the dark, suddenly understanding that the world does not always work the way they expected it to, that the people they dismissed were not who they thought, and that the actions they took in private do not always stay private forever. He thought I was just an old man who would step aside. I made sure he understood otherwise. And my family, my daughter, my grandson, they sleep safe now. That's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing it was ever about. I keep thinking about that tennis ball. My grandson out on the back porch throwing it against the fence post over and over, not asking for anything, just moving. Kids do that. They process things through their bodies before they can put words to them. And when he looked up at me and asked if I was strong, I don't think he was asking about my arms. I think he was asking whether the world was going to hold. I think about what it took to get to that back porch. Not the confrontation with Sterling, not the divorce, not the court hearings. All of that was necessary, and I don't regret a day of it. But I mean the longer road. The years it took my daughter to see clearly. The months it took me to learn patience when every instinct I had was telling me to act. The moment I had to accept that I could not rescue her on my timeline. She had to find her own way to the door. All I could do was make sure the door stayed open. What I know now is that Sterling did not fail because he was caught. He failed because of the kind of man he was, and the kind of man he was had consequences that were always going to catch up with him. That's not fate. That's not luck. That's just the plain arithmetic of how people work. When you build your life on control and intimidation, you are building on sand. The moment the person you've been controlling finds solid ground, the whole structure falls. My daughter found solid ground, and Sterling had nothing left to stand on. I also know that I could have handled things differently and gotten a worse outcome. There were moments in that year when I could have lost my temper at the wrong time, pushed too hard, given Sterling ammunition to use against her. I had to think clearly when I was furious. I had to be strategic when I wanted to be reactive. That discipline, the ability to stay sharp when your emotions are running hot, that is something I had to fight for in myself. It didn't come naturally. It came from choosing it over and over, even when it was hard. And my daughter, what she showed in the end was something that took my breath away. She stayed in that marriage far longer than she should have, and I won't pretend that wasn't painful to watch. But when she finally walked out, she walked out with her eyes open. She went through the legal process with clarity. She rebuilt her finances from nothing. She signed a lease, opened her own account, started a pottery class on Thursday evenings because she wanted to. That is not a small thing. That is a woman who came back to herself after years of being told she wasn't worth much. That takes a kind of inner toughness that no one can give you. You either find it in yourself or you don't. She found it. I'm 63 years old. I have made my share of mistakes. But I know this much. The things that actually last, the things that protect a family, rebuild a life, keep a child safe, they don't come from rage. They come from doing the right thing consistently, thinking ahead, and refusing to fold when the pressure is on. That's what I tried to show my daughter. That's what I hope my grandson is learning out there on that back porch, throwing a tennis ball against a fence post in the afternoon sun. Strong enough. That's all any of us need to be.